So we're keeping an eye on Bangladesh, where the interim government led by Muhammad Yunus has taken charge. It's a country facing a great deal of political churn over the last month in August after Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government fell. We're going to talk to Parvez Abbasi, a professor at the East West University in Bangladesh. Professor Abbasi, thank you so much for joining us. We would like to talk to you a little bit about what the political situation is right now in Bangladesh, how the interim government has been performing under Muhammad Yunus. Could I ask you to begin by just explaining what the priorities are for the interim government at this point in time? Do you believe that they've managed, after the initial period of violence and instability that we saw in the country, do you think the interim government has managed to maintain some sort of hold and bring back stability to the country?
All right. Thank you, Shashank. That's a very probably that's one poignant question that I'd like to answer again. That's also a bit of a background. As you know, that again, this interim government is the result of a massive uprising, which was spearheaded by student demonstrations against initially the quota that we had, quota dispensation that we had, and because of long-standing anti-incumbency issues like massive inflation, corruption, uh, deteriorating law and order situation, human rights abuse, lack of democracy and civil space, what happened was there was a massive outpouring. Now, what we have got over here at the moment is an interim government headed by former Nobel laureate Professor Dr. Muhammad Yunus. Now, once he reached Dhaka, and again, he had announced an initial interim cabinet, which has gone through one period of expansion and a certain degree of reshuffling of posts. Now, as you know, that during any revolution, if there's a post-revolution scenario is quite chaotic because there's a motley force that is basically was banded under one big tent. So with diverse agendas. So yes, there was, as you have said, that initially there was a deterioration in law and order situation. The police force, or the BJB, or the border guard forces, which were seen closely aligned with the former government of uh, Prime Minister Hasina, that had a lot of blood on their hands because they fired on innocent protesting students. So there was a lot of bad blood, and again, there was a lot of uncertainty. But now, slowly and steadily, what we see is that the interim government is coming to grips of basically settling the larger issues. So what we see now is that again we have again we have an advisor for defense, we have an advisor for national unity, and we have very solid people on basically for again the finance ministry, or for that matter the planning ministry or the education ministry, and also we have a former IMF veteran helming the Bangladesh Bank. So the first, now we'll come to what are the big issues of the interim government. The interim government, and this is the part, all what's in a name, as we say, but the issue is with the nomenclature. It's not a caretaker government, so it has a broad-based popular mandate, not through an election, but through a popular uprising. And again, the students are the big drivers of this. The first one is that they are going to carry out some systemic reforms. So what are the big areas of reform that they have promised to focus on? Number one, fixing the law and order situation. That's a must. So again, incidents of lawlessness that has to be curbed, and that is slowly going on. Isolated attacks on minority communities, that has drawn universal condemnation. And again, there has been, as I've been reiterating in every interview, this has drawn harsh condemnation from the interim government advisors. And also now concrete steps are being taken so the troublemakers can't take advantage of this chaotic situation. Number three, and this is probably the biggest issue at hand, is basically depoliticization of the system. Because in the last 16 or 18 years or so, what had happened is that, again, whether it's in the law enforcement agencies, especially the police, the bureaucracy, the civil service, the judiciary, there has been stuffed with stuffed and staffed, both basically with former government cronies or Awami League cronies or people who belong to Chhatra League. So again, there's a degree of depoliticization that should be carried out. And so that basically requires a longer process. And number two is again establishing the independence of the judiciary, because the judiciary had been for the best part of the time was following the diktats of the former government. And last but not the least, and this is where probably where the biggest burden of expectation lies, is fixing the economy. Because as you know, that we have already taken a $4.7 billion loan from IMF. And along with this, the banking system is in a complete mess. It has been a victim of kleptocratic, crony capitalistic cabal. And only recent estimates have shown that at least $100 billion, and I quote, $100 billion have been siphoned off in the last 10 years, which has been aided and abated by the elites, which includes not only the political elites, but also bureaucrats and also businessmen who are all in the take. So, and again, right now you have inflation in double digits. So the inflation rate is 11.47%. The food inflation is 14.5%. And unemployment among the 15 to 35 age group is hitting at the rate of 40%. So you have had jobless growth. Along with this, you have all those mega infrastructures, which if it was implemented effectively, would have given us a lot of benefit. But again, they're excessively leveraged, and they have, again, the corruption has increased the cost twofold and threefold. So all of those are basically the short to medium term challenges of the interim government. But the biggest task is also to announce a time bound schedule for basically participatory inclusive elections within the next 1.5 years or 2 years at best. So how the interim government manages to clean this aging stable is a Herculean task. So it would require the cooperation of almost all the stakeholders, and it required to basically bring in the confidence of the major stakeholders in Bangladesh.
And,
So all
and
of
if I,
those
Professor,
things
if I could
need to be
ask you a
factored in.
question, if I can ask you a question about those stakeholders, you raised some of the questions about the issues, and I'll get back to you on that. In terms of
Yes.
the stakeholders, there is, of course, no representation for the Awami League, and of course, the party is significantly unpopular at this point in time. Could you tell me a little bit about how, when you talk about stakeholders, can we talk about a little bit about the political parties in question? Perhaps, for example, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP. How is Khaleda Zia and the BNP seeing what's been happening with the interim government? Because oftentimes the established political parties are sometimes in the best position to reinvent themselves and take back power after a certain period of time. So my question to you is, there have also been questions about whether the BNP is significantly reduced, whether it really has the power it once used to after 15 years of Awami League rule. So could I ask you, when you talk about stakeholders, to talk about who the big political forces and the big political players are right now in Bangladesh outside of the interim government?
Sure. So again, because you brought up BNP over here, see, again, one thing was for sure that there are two big parties in Bangladesh. One is Awami League, another one is BNP. And till probably till 2008, what you had was alternating seesaw changes in the electoral process. Once BNP was in power, and then the people would vote against it and again bring in Awami League. So there was a duopoly. And eventually, what happened was from 2014 onwards, Awami League or the Awami League-led government under former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina had managed to, through either process of coercion or state intimidation, had basically driven away other political parties, namely BNP. Now, BNP's key strength is not basically street agitation, but it is widely popular in many parts of Bangladesh. It has a solid fan base. And what happens over here is that it is, because it has been out of power for the last 18 years, so it's a party in waiting to get to power. But this is the part where we need to focus on. It needs to get to power through an electoral process, and it's not done and dusted. And BNP also understands that, again, that this process of, again, administrative overhaul, economic troubleshooting, so to speak, and bringing in or ensuring law and order is a tall task. So I think they will be content to basically comply with or cooperate with the interim government. And this has been evident from the statements of former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia, or again Mirza Fakhrur, who's the General Secretary, or even Tariq Zia, Khaleda Zia's son, who has a strong hold on the party, who's in exile in London. So from all of these statements, they are saying that they are willing to give support to the interim government to basically fix up or basically clean up the system. So again, but they also have reiterated that again, they do not want the interim government to fail, but they would want the interim government to announce a time-bound schedule in the next 3 to 6 months. So probably BNP would be willing to wait for a period of 6 months for the electoral schedule. And again, it's too early to make a prediction, but probably for a year and a half, the interim government would take some time to carry out some short-term or some intermediate changes to the process. Until then, probably BNP would be willing to wait patiently.
Understood. And if I could ask you a question, something that's got a lot of interest here in India is just the recent news about the removal of the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami that was placed by the Sheikh Hasina government just a little while back. Could I ask you to address, some of the concerns, to speak frankly, that have been coming up in India about the fact that a lot of the analysis on the situation in Bangladesh has been concerned about parties like the Jamaat-e-Islami, what they stand for, as well as their very troubled history and their relationship with India in the past, as well as their role in the 1971 war. So there's a great deal of concern about things like that. You of course talked about, when revolutions happen, sometimes it's a motley crew of people who carry it out. The attacks on minorities that took place were seen as evidence that, look, part of the motley crew of forces that brought Sheikh Hasina down were Islamist parties that have been cracked down on over the last 15 years, and that the fall of the Sheikh Hasina government and after the passing of the interim government, that these parties will be in a very strong position to assert their claim for political power in Bangladesh when they've been effectively suppressed. And that may mean any number of terrible things for Bangladesh or the India-Bangladesh relationship. That has been the analysis coming out of India. Could I ask you for your view on how you see the interim government's decision to remove the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami, how you see their role in what comes in Bangladesh in the future?
Oh, thank you, Shashank. You have given a very succinct summary of, again, the narrative emanating from New Delhi. And I will answer it one by one, and I try to answer it as objectively as possible. Now, this herein is, again, and it lies the nub of the problem, so to speak, because number one, when you have looked into, again, not all, mind you, but the majority of the opinion or analysis that is coming in from New Delhi, where is this? Who is basically you have to go for? Who are the ones or experts, so-called experts, carrying out this assessment? And with all due respect to their erudition and knowledge, if you go through their articles, these are the very people. And I'm not talking about again the policy mandarins in New Delhi, but again the people who influence this policy mandarins. Now, these are the people who have in the last 10 to 15 years. Have arrived in Dhaka, have been feted, have been royally treated, and these are the ones who have enthusiastically supported growing relationship between Dhaka and Delhi, and and also the fact that again Prime Minister Hasina, for all her shortcomings, has been a loyal ally of India, and she has ensured security and cooperation for India. But when you look into the analysis, there has also been a lot of justification for the reasons as to why the elections, though they were tampered, though the elections were again orchestrated or blatantly manipulated or fraudulent, again we would say that look, again BNP and Jamaat are completely anti-Indian, or again they are very pro-Chinese, or again the Pakistani elements through ISI would run rampant, and again this would compromise the security of India, especially the Seven Sisters. So this has been the narrative that has been set in. So with all due respect, and this is the problem that we have said, and I'll answer each of your questions if you give me the time, because again, your question...
Please take all the time you need. Please take all the time you need.
Yes. again, and probably this has been one of the biggest successes of Army League is that in Delhi you have a so-called colloquial Khan market gang. So, well, I do not know if it really exists or not, but again, that is the colloquial term that has been used. In Dhaka, we also have our equivalent of the tri-state gang. So, what is the tri-state gang? Gulshan, Baridhara, Banani. This is the place where all the elites live, the businessmen, the diplomats, the politicians, and again, these are the people who interact most on vis-a-vis the Delhi to Dhaka relations. So one of the problems is that again, somehow the India-based analysts or the Indian analysts have basically been taken in by the narrative that was coming off from the ruling party in Bangladesh, which was Awami League. And again, there was a willing suspension of disbelief, because if you could just even talk to any people who was not in the government, you would see that there was a rising disconnect between the ruling party members and the ordinary people vis-a-vis the state of the economy, massive inflation, massive corruption, massive unemployment, massive foreign debt, and also the lack of accountability and transparency, or the fact that there again the basic democratic rights were being eroded, or because and we should not also forget that again Awami League also had also played this minority card very successfully, because somehow they had given this, or they had conveyed the impression that again that the minorities were basically protected in Bangladesh under Awami League. But in recent times there had been orchestrated riots where you have found out that former Awami League activists had been also involved in this. And again, in terms of land grabbing, or again possession, or basically strong arming minorities in giving away land or property. Now again, that was the highest under the Army League regime, but somehow it basically showed that it was a big custodian of minority rights. Or Bangladesh would be a Taliban land without basically Hasina. Now, what has happened since? Now, as you know over here, that again, uh, when this basically this people's revolution took place, there was a coalescing of almost all the forces who were basically opposed against us, Hasina's autocratic rule of governance, and that included parties left of center, right of center, so on and so forth. And erstwhile allies of Hasina, for example, members of the Hafazat or Khilafat-e Majlis, now, these people also were patronized by Awami League to show that, again, it had a broad connect with a large segment of the people. They also broke rank opportunistically. And one of the problems with Jamaat-e-Islami was that, yes, Jamaat-e-Islami was, again, was basically the top tier of the leadership were tried. Many of them were arrested. Some of them were hanged as per the law over there. But again, because Jamaat had been actively basically, you also need to know that again, that the Army League government had at least 10 years of time to basically ban Jamaat from politics. Why did they take the opportunistic decision of banning Jamaat when the students' agitation was an all-time high? Because that means that they had kept artificially Jamaat on life support. So again, what this black and white relationship that we want to basically want often is portrayed, that is not necessarily true, and it is true that religious-based political parties do operate in Bangladesh just like in India. India has a secular constitution, but again, and again, I'm not basically going to point into the internal matters of India, but BJP itself is basically has been successfully ruling India for a long period of time at the helm. So I'm just going to say this, that again, and something that I always try to point out, that Jamaat's vote base is rather limited. It might be an organized party, but in 2008, the last time we had free and fair elections, its vote share was 4.8%. The last day or yesterday, I had gone on the Indian channel's interview, and again, I was told that again, see, why are you worried? Why are you just saying that Jamaat has a limited vote base? They have an infinite capacity to hijack state power. Well, that's rather rich coming from a party or from a country where basically the BJP is at the helm of power, and also again where you have very specific religious specific or country specific legislations like NRC and CAA. I'm just telling you that again, when you have one kind of narrative, that brings in another kind of counter narrative. But the one thing that what really needs to be seen is that in India, in Bangladesh, almost the interim government, the one good thing is that people are cognizant of the fact that it is in Bangladesh's interest as well as in India's interest to maintain this relationship because India is one of our oldest allies. India is our second largest trading partner. India exports around $13.8 billion worth of goods to us, even in 2022. And we imported nearly $2 billion worth of goods. So that's $16 billion worth of trade just alone in goods. That's just the official estimate. Unofficially, there could be another $5 to $6 billion, which has been gone through informal sources. Apart from this, Bangladesh is the second largest source of tourists that goes to India. At least and it's 1.2 million Bangladeshis annually visit to India, largely because of medical reasons, but also because of, again, because of tourism or because of leisure. Apart from this, also Bangladesh is the fourth or fifth largest source of remittance for Indian expats. So on paper, we have $4 billion of currency, $4 billion is annually repatriated from Bangladesh to India. So Indian expats do play a role. And also, we are also engaging India in terms of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So what one needs to see, one needs to understand is India being a populous, the world's largest democracy, 1.5 billion people, it should not shy away from supporting the democratic aspirations of one of its oldest allies, namely Bangladesh. Because what was being basically shoveled down our throats is that a development versus democracy paradigm. So the idea was that, look, if you have enough development, you don't really need to worry about democracy. And I think that if India wants to be a brand ambassador for certain values which are global, and I believe democracy is one of them, so it should support the democratic aspirations of Bangladesh.
Understood, sir.
So yes, there are grievances on both sides which needs to be resolved, like border killing, or for that matter, sharing of common rivers, or basically again.
Understood, Professor. I would love to get to the India Bangladesh side of the equation, but just to come back to what we were talking about, just to close off the conversation on so some of the concerns that have been coming from New Delhi. Of course, there was of course just very recently the release of Jashimuddin Rahmani. He was the chief of an Islamist outfit. Someone who's been accused of targeted killings. That is something that has again caught a lot of attention here in India, and is being used as sort of evidence of the fact that, look, as we mentioned before, that it is perfectly legitimate, for example, to say that the protests that brought Sheikh Hasina's government down were led by a diverse coalition of forces, including the students' movement, people who want a democracy, but also groups that tend to have an Islamist bent in terms of their politics. And now this is being seen as proof that, look at this, Jashimuddin Rahmani has been released by the interim government. What possible reason could it have had to take such a decision? Could you explain that?
Oh, yes, certainly. Well, one of the things that has actually happened in recent times, and you have to see, this is also courtesy of Prime Minister Hasina, again, is that, again, often many of, let's say, the alleged extremists that were put away, they were put away on very flimsy reasons. If they were given the due process of the law, if the convictions were genuine or airtight, this would not have happened in the first place. And often, what would have happened is that her political rivals, officially labeled as anti-Indian or basically as radical elements of or radical Islamists, to basically justify quashing them or basically incarcerating them. And thus you have, again, many, and you have to, because see, this is basically, we are basically going for cherry picking. Because what has happened is that we have this infamous case of Ainaghar, the place where our security agencies were were carrying out enforced disappearances, and people who have gone away from 10 years, 15 years, because they had, again, they were not involved in anti-state activities, but they were critical of the government. So from there, again, you had leaders from BNP, you had leaders from Jamaat, or Jamaat leaders' children, who were not, again, politically active, who had come away. So the interim government at times, again, I cannot speak for the interim government myself because I'm not a part of it, but I'm just giving you the rationale for it. Often at certain times where basically the cases were not on solid legal grounds, they had, again, over there, the release had taken place. Now, what often happens is that one gets the feeling, and again, I understand that India could be sensitive about its security aspects. That's absolutely valid concerns. And this is the point that we have to make. Delhi was on the wrong side of history by backing Hasina's dictatorial regime for the last 15 or 16 years. Delhi had basically, despite having very strong social capital network, now our cultural connections, it had put all its eggs in one basket. And from the Dhaka perspective, or the Dhaka's side of perspective, it seemed like a case of basically sour grapes. That again, her trusted ally Hasina had gone, and now again you're saying, but see, the reason why we were supporting our favorite dictator was that she could get all the Islamist fundos under control. Well, this is sort of like American policy during the Cold War. I'm just giving you both sides, but yes, you would be if you come to Dhaka, you'd see people of all different shades and views over there. Just like in India, if anybody says that there is a crimson tide which is basically sweeping around, or the Hindutva tide is basically sweeping around India, that would be a gross oversimplification, because again, there is active opposition to religious-based politics, and there's also very vocal adherence to religious-based politics. In Bangladesh also, because of the last 16 years, because of lack of democratic space, what has happened was that, yes, religious leaders, religious clergy, or those who use religion as a means to criticize the government, they had become popular. But now I believe that once the political space is going to open up, the people in Bangladesh usually are more tolerant of diversity. And the idea is that, again, yes, unfortunately, communal bouts of violence are there. It's endemic across the subcontinent, whether it's in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, or for that matter in Sri Lanka. But by nature, we have reacted excessive radical interpretation of any religion, at least 200 years.
Understood.
And I think that, again, we are also aware that, again, India has some valid security concerns, which would be addressed in the near future.
Understood.
But the problem is that you need to make a beginning. And the beginning should be that, again, it should be a state-to-state relationship. Mm-hmm. Somehow a 1.5 billion country cannot invest all its goodwill into one political party or even one political dynasty.
Understood.
So that itself shows a degree of bias, which alienates many people who want to think of India as a traditional friend and ally.
Right, sir.
This needs to be hammered home.
And Professor, I understand, and we'll talk about the India-Bangladesh side of the relationship as well right after this. But I just have to ask, just to come back on the question of Mr. Rahmani, because it is something that is pertinent and something that people are talking about at this time. So forgive me if I ask you another question on this, but specifically the group that I can understand your concerns and the point you're making about how there were concerns that the judiciary had effectively been stacked by the Awami League over the last couple of years to deliver verdicts in their favor, and therefore there are serious questions about whether verdicts and judicial procedures were fair. But just on the specific question of Mr. Rahmani, and again, I acknowledge that you are not a representative of the interim government, but if you could explain what the interim government's calculation is in releasing someone who heads a group, the ABT, that has taken responsibility for the killings of secular bloggers and activists, someone, Mr. Rahmani, who has been a proponent of the Al-Qaeda's activities. This is someone, of course, we can talk about the Awami League's difficulties with ensuring the freedom of the judiciary, but this also seems to be a decision that, to many sitting here in Delhi, is going to be seen as the interim government trying to cover its bases with the Islamist parties and try to make sure that that is covered as well. So there seems to be very little justification in the minds of people here about this sort of decision being made to release someone like Mr. Rahmani. I would love your views on this one as well, more specifically
Well,
on this case?
again, I believe the person would be, I'm not skirting this response, but again, I believe the person who would be most suitable to give you this response is probably the law advisor of the interim government. But again, as you cannot get him as of yet, and again, the rationale for basically release of Rahmani, there has been also a lot of discussion in Bangladesh for and against this. That remains to be seen. So that's why I said that again, what was the rationale for releasing him? Was it because of one general amnesty against everyone who had been basically tucked away by the former regime of incriminating evidence, or again, was it because of simply these factors need to be explained by the interim government? But I would again like to reiterate, Bangladesh is a sovereign country. Bangladesh, with this is a new dispensation, and again, as much as again we would like to basically again we would not like to ruffle the feathers of our friends in New Delhi. But again, India also has to understand that again, this excessive or what would be the hype or hysteria that has been, because again, what is happening over here that somehow people are saying that the spontaneous uprising of the students is because it's been pulled by strings by radical right. That is also a sort of demeaning. Yes, Mr. Rahmani's case, again, there's a lot of discussion in the media, but again, as I am not privy to the details of the case, but in terms of the rationale for releasing over there, that remains to be seen or investigated. However, Bangladesh, and I know that again, Dr. Yunus's mindset again, he wants a progressive, inclusive Bangladesh. That includes people of all shades, whether people who conform to religion or who are excessively religious, or people who do not, who are rather secular in mindset, whether they are Muslims, the Hindus, or Christians, or Buddhists. And he said this as much in his in a very long speech when he went to Bhakeshwari temple to ameliorate the concerns of the Hindu minority community leaders. And also the idea was that overall, Bangladesh has the largest female participation rate in South Asia. So culturally, again, though we are respectful to tradition, though there's a small minority which, like everywhere else, would like to have a more influence of religious-based politics or tradition on everyday life, the majority of people are for basically a greater degree of inclusivity. And yes, and there is also a serious concern about that again of a rise of religious radicalization, as in everywhere in the world. But in Bangladesh, the law enforcement agencies, they also have their work cut out. And we know that again, Bangladesh not make should make sure that again religious radicalization uh, should not take a basically foothold in the country. I believe there's a consensus. There was a consensus across governments, and this consensus still exists in Bangladesh.
Understood. So, Professor, if I
But
may ask you,
again,
yes.
if people they are not going to infringe on people's democratic right to criticize or use a certain percent. So till now, what is happening is that isolated incidents are being picked up to basically cover a massive intelligence failure on Delhi's part to predict that again Hasina's government was wildly unpopular, and because of India's continued support for Hasina, India has also unfortunately reduced its popularity amongst a large segment of the Bangladeshis. So I think this is instead of owning up to this, we are just basically honing into some religious fringe elements who have been released. I agree with you. Personally, I believe that again there is no space for religious-based radical politics anywhere in South Asia. But unlike in Pakistan or even in India, we over there have been rather successful in containing religious-based radicalization. And there is also a problem that again, when you see a person in religious attire, let's say whether he has a skull cap or he has a beard or he's wearing or a woman is wearing a burqa, that means we consider that person is a religious fanatic. That kind of visual profiling also needs to go away, because What we saw often on Indian media was that, again, a segment of over where students from the madrasas, the religious clergies, they were also basically protesting, and they said, oh, this is a religious inspired agitation that is taking place. Because that is what I've been also following the Indian media narrative. And again, at times this is rather hurtful because, again, the revolution that was spearheaded was done by almost all segments of the people, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, everyone. So, and it is all done for a better future, a more democratic future, where human rights are enshrined. Again, I know this sounds like right now they're sounding like copybook aphorisms, but that is the case. So yes, we are also aware that, again, religious radicalization is not a good thing, and again, religious radicalization should not be encouraged under any circumstances. I hope that our neighbors also understand that.
Understood. So thank you so much for explaining your perspective on what you're seeing coming out of New Delhi, particularly on the question of radicalization. I think India and Indians would have slightly a different view on this matter. But thank you for your candor and for explaining what you see as the developments coming out of Bangladesh. If I could ask you one last thing, on where the India-Bangladesh relationship stands. You've already laid out for us what the view is in Bangladesh about India's role with Sheikh Hasina. We can, of course, have a debate on why India chose to take the policy it did. But could I ask you, moving forward now, if you were the power that be, and you had the power to advise the Indian government, what would you say in terms of what India's policy should be towards towards what has happened in Bangladesh and towards the new political forces? Are there political forces, for example, that India should be looking to work with in particular? What sort of role would you like to see India take as the country transitions through this interim government, perhaps to elections over the next 1.5 to 2 years? Just your view of what
Yeah.
would be a more appreciated role if
Yeah.
Bangladesh
I
is
think
seen?
I think this is the most important question of the entire interview, because, again, this is a question that focuses on the future. Number one, again, the idea is that India has a lot of soft capital. One of it is cultural values, and one of the deeply ingrained cultural values of India is, again, tolerance and a deep-rooted appreciation of democratic norms. So India should, number one, welcome, because, again, till now, India had said that, again, we would not comment on Bangladesh's elections or violence because it's an internal issue. So what India would like we should do is, again, yes, they should they could be critical of what changes are taking place in Bangladesh, but they should be also objective in their assessment. This excessive bias towards the former regime of Hasina, that should be basically filtered, and they should also practically also admit that, to all intent and purposes, for at least a decade, because of the nearly 1,000 to 2,000 casualties that were inflicted on in just 2 or 3 days during the student agitation. Now, people, this generation, the young generation that will have, they have a severe degree of disconnect with Army League. Army League will continue to be relevant in Bangladesh, but I don't think they will be in a significant position to influence politics on the national level for at least the 5 to 7 years. But India needs to engage with Bangladesh. So what can India do? First of all is that India has been a traditional trade partner. India has been a traditional development partner, and it should have a frank dialogue or exchange with Bangladesh. The people to people's contact should maintain. And yes, India should, and I think this idea was mooted before, they should come up with a special envoy, or they should send a special envoy who is basically a clean envoy. That means not people who are seen to be very close to the former Army League government, but someone who is a fresh face, someone who is not carrying a lot of luggage, and he should come up as a special as a special envoy who could basically, or ambassador at large. So again, what you would do is basically sort out some of the misunderstandings with Bangladesh. For example, how long would former Prime Minister Hasina be allowed to stay in India, or would Delhi or basically India become a hub of basically anti-Bangladesh or anti-interim government activities? So what is their status? That India should, well, that's India's internal call, but they should expedite this. And you should also know that again, just like again, there has been a great degree of trade synchronicity. And again, Bangladesh is still interested in carrying out long-standing free trade agreements with India. So India should continue engaging with Bangladesh, but this time they should continue to engage with all stakeholders. And I'd be some of my friends in New Delhi, I'd like to burst their bubble that unfortunately the Pakistan High Commission is not that important in recent times. Pakistan itself is a victim of a prolonged economic and military crisis. And again, China had very little to do with, and what I saw is China-backed, Pakistan-backed coup. Well, that you are basically giving them much more credit than it's due. And again, the Chinese themselves are also in a limbo because they've invested significantly with the Prime Minister Hasina's regime. And now there are questions of accountability in that issue. So India has a lot to gain in terms of engaging with, and this is the problem that they made last time around. BNP, again, is probably a very important political party. So they should also engage with BNP. Some of the youth political parties that are coming in, again, they should engage with this. And it might sound like heresy, but again, Jamaat is open to doing business with India too, as has been insinuated by even former Prime Minister Hasina. Because in 2000, I remember that even a month, even 6 months back, former Prime Minister Hasina had stated that in 2001 she lost the elections because the Indians had collaborated with BNP because she would not sell gas to Tata. That was her assertion, and it's on public media. So again, the idea is India, number one, is to engage with all stakeholders. Number two, it should have free and frank dialogue with Dhaka and look into the areas of cooperation, specifically the Common Rivers water sharing agreement, reducing border killing and smuggling, and also, again, cooperating in terms of climate change. And I think in terms of Dr. Yunus's vision of poverty reduction, again, both countries could cooperate with each other. And India, I do not believe, should be misled by a biased narrative on that matter, or just basically keep on basically supporting one particular discredited party, at least for the next 5 or 7 years. And in a neighborhood where again allegiances are fast changing, it would be a tragedy if India basically decides to loosen the firm bonds of friendship with Bangladesh because of its commitment to one particular political party, because that would be a tragedy for both India and Bangladesh.
Understood. Professor Abbasi, thank you so much for your candor, for your frankness in what you think India should be doing with regards to its relationship with Bangladesh, and for explaining what the mood on the ground is in the country as the interim government takes charge and moves towards making some of the reforms that it has promised it will deliver for the people of Bangladesh. Thank you so much again, Professor Abbasi, and thank you so much for watching India Today Global.